When we light a flame in a chalice, we join with people all over the earth who aspire to our ideal of faith in action. We all work to live up to our UU principles with reason, justice, and compassion. As we light each chalice, we invoke the warmth of community and the flame of hope. I invite those of you on Zoom to light your chalices as I light the communal chalice. Please join me in reading the chalice lighting words. May the flame of this chalice, the symbol of our faith, connect us to all who have come before us, all who are with us in body and in spirit, and all who are yet to come into being. May it serve as a reminder of our unity and connection across all time and place.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is welcoming ancestors. The ritual of welcoming and honoring ancestors is an ancient spiritual practice found in many cultures and traditions. Thus, we begin this ceremony with paying tribute and expressing gratitude to our ancestors. From our histories, our ancestors call to us, asking whence we come and how and whither. We are grateful for the gifts of our ancestors, for their lessons and their challenges, calling us into accountability and responsibility to fulfill their hopes and aspirations for what they dreamed be ours to do. We call on the early Unitarian Universalists, lay people and ordained ministers who brought our faith tradition to Goleta, California. We call on ancestors of the Live Oak congregation, lay people and ordained ministers who brought our faith tradition to Goleta, California. We call on ancestors of the Live Oak congregation who built, grew, and dreamed this congregation and this community into being. We call upon our activist ancestors, those who struggled for justice, freedom, and liberation of all people, and who challenge us to honor the fullness of each and every human being. We call upon and honor the beauty of the earth, this particular part of creation that this congregation ministers in, the mountains, the rivers, beaches, and open spaces, our interconnectedness to nature and to the history of the land itself. May our ancestors guide us on our way. May they bless this space and time and the work we are about to do. Please, everyone, join me in saying, ancestors be with us. Ancestors be with us.
We pause now in the spirit of meditation. Sit comfortably in your chairs. Allow your feet to feel the earth's grounding. Soften your gaze or close your eyes and draw attention to your breathing. Spirit of life and love, we gather grateful for the companionship of hearts and minds seeking to speak the truth in love. We gather grateful for our heritage, for the women before us whose prophetic words and deeds make possible our dreams and our insight. We gather grateful for the women of Live Oak, founders and ministers whose hearts dreamed this congregation into being and whose hands helped shape our community. We gather grateful for the men and women who walk as equal partners, who together use ingenuity, elbow grease, and compassion to hold us together through turbulent times. We gather grateful for the gift of life itself, mindful that to respect life means both to celebrate what life is and to insist on what it can become. May we honor in pride the heroines and heroes of our past, but may we also keep company with the fallen, the broken, the oppressed, under the dazzling noonday sun and star-shimmering night sky. We are they. Well, before I get started this morning, I'd like you to turn to the people around you, a neighbor, and say good morning, and together come up with names of people you consider to be significant in Unitarian Universalist history. You have 19 seconds. Go. If we had the leisure of time, I'd ask you to call out some names. But knowing you're a sophisticated group, I'll surmise that you included men and women. Perhaps you named persons of color. Maybe you managed a mix of those 6 feet under and those still warm to the touch. Raise your hand if you included someone in this congregation. Beautiful. Raise your hand if you named yourself. Well, to affirm your significance to UU history and its future, please repeat after me as if you mean it. I matter to Unitarian Universalism. I am shaping our collective movement. We influence what comes next. We are, Yeah, you can keep repeating me if you want. You can stop the parroting now. We are visionaries and shapers. When preparing for today's service, I encountered this UUA image. Who is a woman in UU history who inspires you? The image links to a Facebook page with a long list of commenters. There were the usual suspects, like Clara Barton and Margaret Fuller, but others named their own ministers and their mothers. We need not look further than the women's faces in this room to discover inspiration. 3 of our Live Oak ministers have been women, all of them brilliant in their own way, all of them have impacted my life, all of whom were human, carrying shadows like the rest of us. And lay women, too, have touched my life in myriad ways. Sylvia Sachs, Frida Carr, Elise Murphy, Liesl Aufderheide, Lynn Levine, Gloria Liggett, Jan Ross. They live in us still. But I'm inspired regularly by the women pictured here and feel abundantly blessed. This morning's service is brought to you by Live Oak's Croning Class of 2026, volunteered by our intrepid facilitator, Marie Arnold, who, impressed by Kendra's service on Black women in the civil rights movement and aware that March is Women's History Month, commented to Reverend Jonathan that we haven't focused specifically on UU women's history for a while. In feminist solidarity, Reverend Jonathan happily replied, "How about March 29th?" That was on March 1st. A grassroots movement in Santa Rosa, California resulted in the formation of the Sonoma County Commission on the Status of Women, who organized the first Women's History Week in 1978. Immigrant and founding historian of women's history, Gerda Lerner, once a member of the Austrian anti-Nazi resistance, along with historian Molly Murphy McGregor, convinced President Jimmy Carter to institute National Women's History Week. In 1987, Congress voted to extend it to the whole month of March to coincide with International Women's Day on March 8th. Molly Murphy McGregor Wood formed the National Women's History Institute, which had a direct influence on me as a young teacher. In 1992, I traveled to Sonoma County for a week-long summer institute. There, I bought a volume of student-friendly vignettes about notable women called Her Story. Her Story. It's also where I picked up the mug that sits on the desk in Live Oak's office bearing the phrase, "Write women back into history." That's what we plan to do today, shed light on pioneering and contemporary women in the UU movement. Enjoy.
Good morning. I'm going to go back more than 100 years, so this is some of the older history. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the Iowa Sisterhood. We read about it in this book called The Prophetic Sisterhood. It's a story of a remarkable group of Unitarian women ministers who in the late 19th and early 20th century built thriving liberal religious communities across the American Midwest at a time when women clergy were barely tolerated barely tolerated in most Eastern male-led denominations. The sisterhood emerged after the 1875 Women's Ministerial Conference, organized by Julia Ward Howe, who you all remember is the one who created International Mother's Day for Peace, coming soon. 21 Unitarian women, many among them the first ordained female ministers in the United States, formed a network to support one another and to serve congregations that male ministers often overlooked, small, rural, and struggling communities in the Great Plains. Their goals included creating community-centered congregations, demonstrating that women could lead full ministries, not just assist the male clergy, and bringing the benefits of liberal religion to the frontier towns. They traveled widely, often alone, establishing or revitalizing 18 Unitarian societies across the Midwest. These ministers became beloved community leaders, offering adult education, cultural programming, social reform activism, and pastoral care and counseling. In these ways, their model of ministry differed from the more formal academic style at the time that was common among the male Unitarian ministers. The women emphasized warm relational preaching rather than doctrinal debate, practical service, and community building. This style worked well in frontier communities and helped Unitarianism take root in places where it had not been before. Despite significant institutional resistance, which I'll talk about, the sisterhood persisted, proving through their hard work that women could lead congregations. They usually had very little money compared to the wealthier parishes in the East, meaning they lived frugally and did much physical work themselves. They often lived together to share expenses and to share the work. Mary Augusta Safford, who's on the left in this slide, I believe, was considered the leader of the Iowa Sisterhood. She helped found and strengthen churches in Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. She served 3 congregations in Iowa over 3 decades and became one of the most respected Unitarian ministers of her era. Other notable figures were Eleanor Gordon, who is Mary Stafford's lifelong friend and collaborator, Florence Buck, later a national Unitarian leader, and not pictured, Mary Stafford's own sister, Angie Safford, also a minister and educator. What makes this story remarkable, really, is the challenges that they faced at this time. Women in religious leadership challenged the deepest social and theological assumptions of that era. Many Christian denominations taught that Scripture restricted preaching and leadership to men. Passages like, "Let your women keep silence in the churches," were interpreted literally, and clergy argued that women preaching violated the divine order. The dominant thinking was that women belonged in the private sphere, home and family, not in public life. This cult of domesticity defined women as nurturers, not leaders. Women ministers were often linked to broader reform movements, the abolition of slavery, temperance in regards to alcohol, and suffrage or voting rights for women. Opponents saw them as radicals who would destabilize society. Political cartoons mocked suffragists and women preachers, portraying them as unfeminine or disruptive. Religious leaders warned that women's public leadership would unravel the family structure and moral order. Public speaking itself was considered unfeminine. Women who preached or lectured were accused of impropriety or arrogance. Ministry was a respected profession, and men feared that allowing women into it would diminish their status or create competition, and clearly they felt threatened. These attitudes made the Iowa Sisterhood's courage and successes all the more extraordinary. They reshaped Unitarianism and opened the door for women's leadership in the ministry, not just for Unitarian and Universalists, but for all congregations. Today, most Unitarian ministers are women, about 60%.
Good morning. I'm Mary, and I'm going to talk about a woman who is not a Unitarian, but she sure had some ideas that she could have been. And her name is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And supposedly, you know, this is one of those stories that that comes down in relations in your family, and supposedly I am a distant relative of hers. So she's always kind of been in my life. Anyway, Elizabeth Stanton Cady, when we hear the name, we usually think of a historical giant, a powerful writer and engaged speaker, and one of the key leaders of the women's rights movement. She helped organize the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, the first women's rights convention in the United States. And she wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, calling for voting rights, education, and legal equity for women. But if we stop there, if we only see her as an activist, we miss something important. Because Stanton was also a daughter shaped by a moment of longing, a wife in a somewhat unconventional marriage, and a mother trying to hold together family life while her mind kept reaching for something more. She was born in 1815 into a prominent family, and from an early age she understood gender expectations. Her father, a respected judge, had hoped for a son, and when Elizabeth, just 11 years old, tried to comfort him, she said something that she'd never forget. "Oh, my daughter, I wish you were a boy." That moment stayed with her. She later said she made a quiet decision at that very moment to prove herself, to become, in her words, learned and courageous. As if achievement could somehow close the gap between who she was and who her father wished her to be. That feeling of pushing against limits never really left her. Now, unlike many women of her time, Stanton received a strong education. She studied math, languages, debates, and other subjects usually reserved for men. But even as a student, she could see the contradiction. Women were capable, but not allowed. And that tension between the ability and the opportunity became both a personal struggle and the fuel for her life's work. In 1840, she married Harry Stanton, an abolitionist and journalist. Their marriage was, by most accounts, a good one, but not a typical one. In a small but powerful act, she removed the word obey from her wedding vows. Over time, they had 7 children, all of whom survived into adulthood, which was very unusual at that time. Motherhood was central to her life, but she also was relentless and restless. She once called her home the center of the rebellion. And you can imagine it, children everywhere, papers scattered, and ideas forming in the middle of the daily chaos. She was writing speeches, shaping arguments, while also tending to the constant needs of a larger household. And she didn't pretend it was easy. She spoke openly of the exhaustion, about how hard it was to find even a little bit of time to think, to write, to be fully herself. And yet those very experiences deeply shaped her ideas. She pushed for change in divorce law, property rights for women, child custody. She began speaking about something that was truly radical at her time. She called it voluntary motherhood, the idea that women should decide if and when to have children. Obviously, she had 7 children, so she decided 7 times. At the time when wives were expected to submit, she said, no, a woman has the right to refuse. She even spoke about what she called the gospel of fewer children. She insisted that women's desires were equal to those of the men. Her thinking didn't stop there. She was willing to question everything, even religion. She was raised in a strict religious tradition, which was Calvinism, and she came to believe that religion often reinforced women's oppression. So in 1895, she published the Women's Bible, challenging traditional interpretations of the scriptures. It was controversial even to some of her allies, and they rejected it. And it reflected something essential about her. She was not afraid to question authority. Over time, her ideas kept evolving, growing, more expansive, more radical. She didn't just want to change within the system, she began to question the system itself, especially marriage. Now, Stanton was often described as a force to be reckoned with, brilliant, charming, determined, someone to push back against what she called the eternal no. But she was also human. Like many people of her time, she had blind spots. After the Civil War, when women were denied the vote, but Black men were granted it, she sometimes directed her frustration in ways that reflected racial prejudice. These moments complicated her legacy, and they matter because they remind us that even those who push for progress can still carry the limitations of their time. So to really understand Elizabeth Cady Stanton, we have to see the whole person, not just the icon, but the woman, a daughter seeking approval, mothers balancing chaos and love, a thinker unwilling to accept easy answers. Her legacy isn't only in what she accomplished, but in how she lived, boldly, thoughtfully, and with deep commitment to become truly herself. And this, to me, kind of reminded me that we have a lot of women that are icons today, but we never really think about who they are behind that icon. And so this kind of gives you a chance to reflect on that with some of the other women in our times, and not in our time.
Good morning. At one of our Sangha meetings, Reverend Tom Owen told, gifted Live Oak a book called Woman's Spirit. It is now, it will be in our library. The Rise of Feminism and the Empowerment of Women in Liberal Religion by Denise Tracy and Emmy Lou Belcher. Reverend Denise Tracy was ordained in 1974. She's had ministries on campus at Harvard, Connecticut, in parishes in Michigan, and she was on the staff for the UUA. She retired in 2014, where she is now the police chaplain in Kate County, where she lives. She says, after the publication of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, I'm sure most of you remember that, questions of happiness and fulfillment were raised in schools and relationships, marital, filial, and parental. One of the places where questions were raised was the church. In Unitarian Universalism, many churches had governing boards and congregational presidents that were solely male. The women's sphere in many churches were filled with participation in the UU Women's Federation, raising money through teas and rummage sales, educational endeavors. Women were highly valued for the sphere they filled, but that sphere was lesser and unequal. Woman's Spirit is a collection of 20 essays by extraordinary Unitarian Universalist women who illuminate their journey of empowerment and evolution. It is a tribute to their dream of a more inclusive, equitable future, and in doing so, reshaped the very fabric of our denomination. Amongst these women are Carolyn Owen Toll. She and Tom serve as co-ministers of the first UU Church in San Diego from 1978 to 2002. They were the first couple to do so. One other woman of spirit and wisdom was Reverend Marjorie Newland Liming. Reverend Liming was ordained as Unitarian Community Church in Santa Monica, California. In 1969, she was called to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Santa Paula. In the same year, she was honored with the Doctor of Divinity degree from Melville-Lombard School of Divinity. In 1974, she was a founding member of the Unitarian Universalist Ministerial Sisterhood and took an active leadership role until the 1990s. Reverend Leming was Beth Swinnicke's mentor. I want to honor Beth Swinnicke as she was our first Live Oak minister. She served for 15 years until retirement. Tom Owen told me that if she had still been alive when the book was written, she would have been one of these notable women of our days. The Reverend Beth died on December 28, 2017, at the age of 81. She was the partner of Peter Haslam. She received the honor of Minister Emerita from Live Oak. Reverend Beth was deeply admired as a collegial mentor, especially to young women in ministry, particularly to Reverend Tina Grant, Reverend Carolyn Price, and Reverend Christine Rahm, who were interns here at Live Oak. She was a pioneer who inspired many to become ministers and counseled countless among us in her many years in the parish. She modeled for us what it is not only to live, but to die with intention, beauty, courage, and most of all, with love. Beth, you will always be in our heart, and today we honor you for leaving us a legacy of which we are proud. The last woman I want to talk about who had a considerable influence on our UU movement is someone who never really officially joined a congregation or church. The Reverend Carolyn McDade has given her life to what she calls the movement. She quickly immersed herself in the groups of women and activists rising up in Boston and across the country in the mid-1970s. Early on, she joined with women in religious group with the UUA, demanding a place for women's spirituality. In 6 short lines, the song Spirit of Life touches so much that is central to our faith: compassion, justice, community, freedom, reverence for nature, and the mystery of life. It finds the common ground held by humanists and theists, pagans and Christians, Buddhists and Jews, gay and straight among us. In closing, I want to acknowledge the wise women who have joined me in preparing this service. We are bound by love, and sharing this morning with you is a privilege. Thank you. Let us go out in the world singing. Let us go out into the world singing songs that proclaim liberty. Songs that turn ashes into garlands. Songs that bind up the afflicted and those who mourn. Songs that, like oaks, have roots that go deep and stand strong. Let us go out into the world singing.